Snow fell from the gray Wyoming sky in thick, unrelenting sheets, swallowing the land in silence. The wind howled through the gaps of a weather-beaten cabin, rattling the shutters like the last gasps of an old man's breath. Inside, Thomas Hale sat at the table with his head buried in his calloused hands, the weight of grief and survival pressing down on his broad shoulders. Thomas was a widower. His wife, Margaret, had died 2 winters ago while giving birth to their last child, and though the baby survived, the price of her loss had hollowed his heart. Alone with 2 little boys and an infant girl, he had been forced to fight the land, the storms, and the loneliness, all while raising children who cried in the night for a mother he could not give them. The farm had once been full of laughter, his wife's voice humming as she baked bread, the children running through the yard. Now, the air inside the cabin felt heavy, as though joy itself had fled. His days blurred into endless chores, chopping wood, tending the livestock, patching fences, feeding the children, while his nights were a battle against silence and despair. It was desperation, not desire, that led Thomas to write a letter months earlier. He'd heard of men in faraway towns who wrote to agencies back east, men who could not manage their homesteads alone, seeking wives through what they called mail-order arrangements. He hadn't wanted to admit he needed help, but the truth was clear: his children needed someone to love them, to care for them as only a woman could. Weeks turned into months. He had almost forgotten about the letter when word came that a young woman, a stranger, had agreed to come west. Her name was Clara. Clara stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn trunk and a knitted shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She was younger than Thomas had expected, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, her brown hair tied back in a simple braid. There was a gentleness in her eyes, though behind it Thomas sensed something else, a hunger for belonging, perhaps even for redemption. She had grown up in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a mill worker who died young. With her mother gone and no siblings, she had been left to work in a factory, unseen and unnoticed, her youth slipping by in the clatter of machines. She had always longed for more, for family, for children, for a place where she might be needed. When she saw Thomas's letter describing his loss, his children, and his need for a wife to share the burden of life, she felt an ache stir inside her. Against all advice, she answered the call. Thomas met her with cautious gratitude. He was not a man of many words, but he tipped his hat and offered to carry her trunk. His children peeked from the cabin doorway with wide, curious eyes. Clara knelt in the snow, smiling softly, and opened her arms. To Thomas's astonishment, his youngest toddled forward, leaning against her for warmth as though he had known her forever. Still, trust is not given in an instant. The first weeks were uneasy. Clara was learning the rhythm of the farm, learning the names of children who cried for their mama at night. She burned the biscuits more than once. The baby woke her at all hours. But she did not complain. She stitched torn shirts, sang lullabies with a voice soft as falling snow, and brought a warmth into the house that Thomas had not felt in years. Then came the blizzard. It was late February when the storm struck, fiercer than any in Thomas's memory. The wind screamed across the plains, tearing snow into walls that buried fences and blocked paths. Livestock panicked in the barn. The firewood dwindled. The children shivered under heavy quilts. On the 3rd night, Thomas grew weak with fever. He had been working outside too long in the cold, trying to keep the roof from collapsing under the weight of snow. Clara found him slumped against the wall, his lips pale, his breath shallow. Fear surged through her. She had not crossed half a continent to lose him now. Through the long night, Clara tended to him with every ounce of strength she had. She boiled snow for water, wrapped him in blankets, and fed the fire with the last of the kindling. When the firewood ran out, she bundled herself against the storm and braved the night. The wind nearly knocked her down, and snow stung her face like needles, but she pressed on, dragging back fallen branches and splintered boards. By dawn, she had kept both Thomas and the children alive. The children clung to her, their small arms wrapped around her skirts, as though they knew she had become the lifeline holding them together. When Thomas awoke, his fever broken, he saw Clara's face illuminated by firelight, her eyes red from exhaustion yet still filled with determination. In that moment, he realized she was no stranger. She was family. The weeks after the storm carried a quiet transformation. Thomas regained his strength, but he looked at Clara differently now, not just as the woman who had come to fulfill a desperate need, but as someone who had chosen, willingly, to sacrifice for them. One evening, as the children slept and the fire crackled low, Thomas found himself speaking words he had not planned. "Clara," he said, his voice thick, "I thought I was only looking for help. But I see now, you've given these children a mother. And me, hope again." Clara's eyes filled with tears. For years she had longed for a place to belong, for children to tuck into bed, for someone to see her worth. She had answered his letter to escape loneliness, but here, in the heart of a snowbound cabin, she had found love. The seasons turned. Spring melted the snow, and with it, the shadows inside the Hale cabin began to lift. Clara planted a garden with the children, teaching them songs as they worked. She patched Thomas's old coat, her stitches careful and sure. She laughed with the children in the fields, her joy echoing against the wide, open sky. By summer, the neighbors spoke of the change. They had watched Thomas's cabin grow dark after Margaret's death, but now they saw smoke curling warmly from the chimney again. They saw Thomas walking taller, his children smiling wider. And they saw Clara, radiant, a woman who had turned sorrow into life. The greatest moment came one autumn evening. Thomas gathered Clara and the children on the porch as the sun set across the prairie in bands of gold and crimson. His hands trembled as he spoke. "Clara," he said softly, "when you came here, I thought I was giving you shelter. But you've given us far more, you've given us love. I can't promise riches or ease, but I can promise this, you will never again face the world alone. You are home now, and these children are yours as much as mine." Clara wept openly, pulling the children close. They clung to her, their little voices calling her, "Mama," without hesitation. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. Thomas slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger, a token he had saved from his wife, not as a relic of loss but as a gift to the woman who had breathed life back into his family. Clara accepted it with trembling hands, her heart bursting with gratitude. Years later, when their children were grown and the farm had flourished, people still spoke of that winter storm, of the mail-order bride who arrived a stranger and became the heart of a family. They spoke of Clara's courage, of Thomas's quiet strength, of the way love can bloom even in the harshest of winters. And whenever Clara looked at the children she had raised, and the man who had given her a home, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks for the letter that had changed her life. For in the end, it was not just a story of survival. It was a story of second chances, of love born from loss, of kindness and sacrifice that turned strangers into family. And it reminded all who heard it that sometimes, the greatest gifts are found not in what we seek, but in what we are willing to give.